Hello everyone and welcome to Saturn Returns with me, Caggie. This is a podcast that aims to bring clarity during transitional times where there can be confusion and doubt. Today I am thrilled to be joined by the wonderful Bryony Gordon. For those not familiar with Bryony's work, she is a self-described accidental mental health and body positivity advocate. She's a journalist who writes for the Telegraph. She is an author of many books, including Mad World, which is a book about OCD. And she is a brilliant blend of humour, wit, and vulnerability. If I had to describe Bryony in one word, it would probably be electric. When she came into my flat, I knew what I hoped she would be like, but she was so much more. And in this conversation, we cover some really heavy subjects, but she does it in a way that is just filled with humour. Honestly, listening back, I was chuckling, giggling along, even though we're talking about OCD and living with addiction and alcoholism. But she is just wonderful in her approach to these subjects. I don't think she realises how wonderful she actually is. And this was one of my favourite conversations. And why I think this episode is so important is because we do touch on things that are very hard. And often people will message me after listening to the podcast saying, I love that you are able to approach heavy things, but always inject a lightness and a humour. And Bryony does that so much that it's wonderful, because it's my favourite way of approaching these things. And I learned a lot in this conversation about alcoholism, about living with OCD. And the prevailing theme for me in this conversation was around belonging. So I hope that this episode finds you when you need it, whether you are battling with some of these subjects yourself, or living with someone, or have someone in your family that's going through it. There's going to be so much wisdom and comfort in this conversation for you. So enjoy. Bryony, welcome to the Saturn Returns podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I feel like you've come in like a storm, which I'm so happy about, because you are exactly the way I thought you would be, in the most wonderful way.
Am I?
Yeah.
I'm feeling really mad. Like I was saying this to you, I'm feeling really, it's so nice to be here and sitting in your peaceful flat, because I've come from, this is so dreary to be retelling you this, but to be putting this on a podcast, that I'm living on a house renovation, and everyone's like, please do tell us about your house renovation. It's like hearing people's dreams. But I didn't realize how discombobulating, I kind of don't realize how discombobulating it is until I leave the house.
Yeah.
And I come somewhere else and I'm like, oh, it's all really chill.
Well, I feel like here's like quite a cocoon. So hopefully it'll make
If you don't mind, can I live here until it's finished?
Yeah,
I'll bring all my stuff round. I'm the 10-year-old child and my husband. You won't mind that, will you?
No, it's absolutely fine. But aside from that, like, how are you at the moment?
I'm good, I think. It's a good question. And I always like to try and answer it kind of honestly, because it's really easy, isn't it, to go, I'm fine. I'm overwhelmed, you know. Mm-hmm. I try and I'm really trying to do that thing of like just allowing myself to be how I am without kind of judging in any particular nasty way. I'm overwhelmed, but I'm alive, which is nice. I've got a book that's about to come out, so I'm very nervous about that, because I sort of bled onto the page. But right now, in this moment, sitting in your living room, I feel calmer.
Okay, good. And for the audience that doesn't know, would you be able to explain a little bit in your own words about who you are and what you do?
Yes. So my name is Bryony. I'm an alcoholic in recovery. I'm a writer. So I started as a journalist. I sort of trained as a journalist, but I'm also through journalism, I started sort of 10, 15 years ago writing about my own experiences of my own of mental illness. Really because I was desperate. So I was a feature writer on the Telegraph, but I was quite successful, but behind it I was battling addiction, obsessive-compulsive disorder, and when I had my daughter 10 years ago, I started writing about it, really. And so I've sort of become an accidental mental health campaigner, I guess, but also kind of body positivity campaigner. So I love exercise. It's been completely transformative for my mental health. But I'm also I live in a larger body. But I sort of spend a lot of time trying to tell women, especially women, my age, in their sort of mid-40s, you can do this, you can get out there, exercise is for everyone. So I've done things like run marathons in my underwear, as you do, because why not? I'm trying to think, who am I?
Don't worry, I think that, but it's interesting that you started that with alcoholic. Do you feel that that's quite a big identity piece for you?
I do, yeah, I do. I feel that if I describe myself, there are lots of people that are really funny about it as a term, and they think that's not just who I am. I once interviewed Gabor Mate, who I love.
Well, you refer to as the Santa Claus of trauma.
He is, yeah. He's just incredible. And I said,
he is incredible.
But I said to him, as an alcoholic and as an addict, your work is really invaluable. And he said, I'm not going to do his accent, but I am now going to do his accent. And he was like, you're more than just an addict. You're a person, and that doesn't capture your character. And I get that, but if I don't wake up every morning and acknowledge that I am an addict and an alcoholic, I can't be the rest of me. Does that make sense?
Yes, but would you be able to explain that a little bit more?
Okay, so basically, if I don't do the work to stay sober and not pick up a drink or not pick up a drug, I can't do anything else. I can't be anything else. I can't be a mother. I can't be a wife. I can't be a journalist. I can't be a writer. I can't show up on time and do this podcast with you, because probably I'd be dead, actually.
Do you think then, obviously, we both adore Gabor Mate and all of his work, but do you think that they're saying that is someone speaking from the privilege of not being an addict?
I don't think so. I think his belief is that addiction is a kind of trauma response, and I also get that, and I do think I agree with him. I don't necessarily believe that you are born an alcoholic, but also the kind of coping mechanism that I have chosen, or the way I have chosen to sort of address my alcoholism. And when I got sober, I was really privileged to be able to go to a rehab, which is something very few people are able to do, because society in the UK, government's not set up to support people with addiction. We still see alcoholism and addiction as like a character flaw rather than an illness or a mental illness, which is what I think it is. And as a mental health campaigner, I can see that we've come a long way in terms of the way we deal with depression and anxiety, but we're still sort of back in the dark ages when it comes to alcoholism and addiction. I don't know where I've gone off on one.
Why
there.
do you think that is?
I think because it's very difficult if you are not an alcoholic to understand why someone can't stop drinking, or can't
Especially
stop taking
when it's
drugs,
damaging the rest of their life and their relationship, and you just think, why are you continuing to do something that's harming you and everyone around you? Actually,
it's actually hard to understand why you're doing it if you're an alcoholic yourself.
Well, you said it wasn't in that interview, it was with Julia Samuels, and you said at the end a question which was, why do I'm probably going to butcher this, but there are things that I want to do. Or no, I want to do what's good for me, but I need to do what's bad for me, or something along those lines. And I got what you meant. And is that kind of the feeling of addiction, that it's like you actually can't help it?
Yeah, it's almost like, also, I think, Caggie, there's like an element of also you're used to a certain amount, like pain is what you're used to, you know. So I used to think that drinking and taking drugs was a way to numb pain, but it was also a really clever way of keeping me in pain, if that makes sense. And I realize now, with having done a lot of work on myself, that being in pain was something I was quite used to, you know, without sounding, I mean,
normalized it sort of thing.
But it was like, it was what I thought I deserved, essentially. Like, I couldn't imagine that I deserved anything better. And I can still now, I'm nearly 7 years sober, clean and sober, you know, but there are still other ways. It's been a long time since I had a drink or took a drug, but there are still other ways I will engage in that sort of slightly addicty behavior.
Like sabotagey behavior.
Yeah.
You know,
And
it can be creative.
Totally.
You stop one thing, then it's like whack-a-mole.
Yeah, like whack-a-mole.
See, that could be a
totally,
problem.
you know. And like, okay, so this book that I'm about to bring out, Mad Woman, is about a lot of it is about binge eating. You know, for me, that's a really, you know, food is it's the first way any of us learn to have any control. When we're children and our parents give us some broccoli, we can like throw it on the floor. You know, it's the first time we feel powerful. And, you know, and for me, food has been, you know, I didn't need to take drugs and drink to live, but you do need to eat.
Yeah, that's why they say it's one of the most complex sort of addictions, so to speak, because you have to address it 3 times a day, every day for the rest of your life. You can't just cut it out.
No, you can't abstain. And I think that for me, it's the easiest way now that I can sort of self-sabotage and put myself in a place of shame, actually, is like binging.
And the shame was also something I presume that you experienced with the alcohol and the drugs. It becomes this sort of like self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, but you feel the shame, and then the only way you know to numb the shame is to pick up more drugs or more alcohol or more food. And then it's like you get stuck in this sort of cycle of shame.
Because you kick the can down the road, but it's like, it's worse when you get there.
Yeah, it is absolute madness. But I think the reason I talk about all of this really openly is because it blew my mind when I realized I wasn't a bad person. I was just an ill person who sometimes did bad things because of my illness. So I, you know, if I go right back to how I ended up realizing I was an alcoholic, as a child, I'm kind of burbling here, but it was only through writing about OCD, which I'd suffered from since childhood, and opening up about that I got to a place where I was like, I'm drinking in a way that isn't normal, perhaps. And it's only by being open about these things that I've sort of been able to get better. So I wrote this book 10 years ago called Mad Girl, which was all about OCD, experiencing my experiences with OCD. So, you know, I'm sure lots of you hear people say, "Oh, I'm a bit OCD," and they'll say
they're a bit tidy.
Yeah, and they're like, "You should see my sock drawer," and I'm like, "Why is it always your sock drawer?" Like, I don't have a sock drawer. Like, my husband always jokes, "I wish you had the good type of OCD," but there is no good type. You know, it's a disorder. It's like,
and it can be a very crippling one.
It is. It's hugely crippling, and from childhood, from a very early age,
How early?
So I think I first experienced OCD when I was about 11. And I became convinced that I was dying of AIDS, which I didn't know at the time. So at the time there was this huge, sorry, I'm really burbling. I'll get into my flow in a moment.
Wonderful. Please keep doing it.
In the early 90s, there was this hugely shaming public health campaign warning against HIV and AIDS. And I can now look back and think, God, that was awful. That must have been terrible for the gay community, you know, especially. It was a really sort of horrible homophobic campaign.
Shaming.
And very shaming, right? And I remember And there was no reason why, as an 11-year-old girl living in a sort of terraced house in West London, you know, with like an Aga, I'd never kissed a boy, you know, I'd never taken drugs or anything like that. Like, why I would have woken up one morning and gone, I must have AIDS. But the thing I've later realized is OCD it's very canny. It will kind of attach to like whatever the public hysteria of the age is, right? And I remember waking up one morning, I was about 11, 12, and I was like, I've got AIDS. And if I haven't got AIDS, I'm going to get it. And obsessively just like washing my hands until they ironically started to bleed. And I remember like being so terrified that I was going to infect my family. I remember like hiding my toothbrush under my pillow. And I just had this feeling. I was like, I'm going to die. And it was kind of around this time. It was kind of around Christmas, and I remember thinking, I'm never going to have another Christmas again.
And you were 11?
I was 11, 12, yeah. And it was just really bizarre. And I sort of had to say phrases that I thought could like control. So I'd say I'm HIV negative. I'm HIV, I'd have to say them again and again, and then I'd be worried that I hadn't said them right.
And this was just to yourself in private?
Yeah.
So you didn't tell anyone?
No. And then it was really strange that as quickly as it sort of came on, it went away again. But then a couple of years later, it came back, and it was all sort of mixed up with, there was this other sort of real, there was this other real public hysteria, which rightfully so, about paedophiles. And I became convinced. I was like, maybe you're a serial killing paedophile and you've blanked it out in horror. Bear in mind, I was a child myself at the time.
As in, you blanked out the experiences of doing it?
Yeah. And I was like, what if you had done this but you don't
know.
remember? And you've kind of like...
So it's like these really irrational, intrusive thoughts that just take hold,
yeah.
basically.
So the way and you can see why people never spoke, people don't speak about this type of OCD. And I describe it now as, the way I describe OCD now is it's your brain refusing to acknowledge what your eyes can see, right? So that your hands are clean, or the oven is off, or the door is locked, or the candle is out. I used to take my iron to work with me. It was just easier.
Worry that you would leave it on.
Yeah. Or the bump in the road is just a speed bump and not a child-shaped bump. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, even though you can see it, your brain's like, but what if? So
that must be exhausting.
It's really exhausting. And then there's a sort of subset of OCD, which is kind of, broadly speaking, referred to as pure O. Although that's not a fish, it's just another form of OCD, but it's regarding thoughts. So we all have thousands of thoughts a day, right? We are not all of our thoughts, right? We're just the people that happen to hear them, yeah? Which is a very helpful phrase. And we all have intrusive thoughts. So I always say this, we all have that thought, we're at a party, someone hands us their baby, and it's like, what if I just threw your baby on the floor? Whenever I say that, I'm like, I really hope other people have had that thought.
Like, do you guys have that
people got to back out the room, like, no, I've never had that thought, Bryony. Or, like on the train, they think, what if I was to just throw myself in front of the train, or,
or push someone or something.
Yeah.
Just things that then make you think you're a bad person for having that thought.
But most people kind of dismiss the thought, and go, oh, clearly I'm not going to do that. But someone with OCD will become really distressed by the thought, and
because they think that they're going to do it.
Well, they think it's a sign they're a bad person,
right?
And then they will ruminate on the thought to prove they are not the thought. But of course,
and to do certain rituals or things to counteract that.
Yeah, and like neutralize the thoughts. And so it's incredibly common. Like, what I didn't know was that it was all over the country, nay, the Western world. There were children who were scared that they had AIDS, who were scared that they might be serial killing paedophiles. Like, these are such common forms of OCD, but nobody ever talks about them. And
that presumably creates a lot of, or contributes to, the feelings of shame, and the isolation within it, because you're thinking, I'm the only one that thinks these thoughts.
Well, exactly. I'm the worst person in the world.
Yeah.
And I sort of had worked out that there was this thing called OCD, and that all of my symptoms sort of matched it. But it's they call it the doubting disease. So it was like, what if this is all a massive double bluff and I'm just using OCD as an excuse and I'm a terrible person? And, you know, also in the 90s, my mum did take me to the doctor because it was clear that something was up. And I did get put on antidepressants when I was 17. And then I got put on this like waiting list for CBT. And I don't know if I even ever got to the top of it. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And there was just nothing really available. And so, but the thing I did find that really helped quieten my brain was alcohol, and then later cocaine, you know, that helped me to carry on drinking the alcohol without blacking out, basically.
So the two things were really quite interconnected.
Yeah, but it wasn't until my 30s that I really worked that out. Mm-hmm. You know, it's kind of incredible how our brains can sort of function in denial for very long periods.
Yeah, totally.
But it wasn't until I'd spoken, so I somehow managed to sort of carve out a life of relative success, you know. And this was the other thing, that I didn't look like someone who was mad, quote unquote, you know. I wasn't rocking back and forth in a padded cell or whatever. So I was kind of like, you're not mentally ill, you're just a bad person, Bryony. And then I sort of managed to manage, you know, through using alcohol and drugs to maintain this career, you know, and I did quite well. And I somehow met a nice man, got pregnant. And it was when I had my daughter in 2013, 2014, and the OCD started to sort of cling on, maybe you've hurt her, that I was like, right, I've got to do something about this. Right. Because this is not just affecting me now. This is affecting the most precious, wonderful thing in my life. And I remember sitting at the offices of the Telegraph, and I'm like, I've got to write about this. I've got to write about this, because if I put it down in black and white, this type of OCD I have, and then they print it, either the police will come and take me away, but then at least it's done. It's done.
Which must have been terrifying.
Yeah, but I was like, in a way, I'm like, it's done. Like, yeah. I've called myself out, or they won't. And maybe people that also have this type of OCD will get in touch. And
it was the latter.
And I'll know that I'm not bad, or I'm not mad, or I am mad, but I'm not bad, kind of thing. And yeah, and the latter, and it was incredible looking back that the Telegraph published this thing, really. But anyway,
did they know at the time?
No. And it was incredible, because I mean, hundreds, thousands of people got in touch saying me too, if not OCD, then some other form of mental illness.
And how did that feel?
It was unbelievable. It was such a pivotal moment in my, you know, without sounding cheesy, like journey to healing. Because I always say this, the thing that all mental health issues have in common is that they work by lying to you. Mm-hmm. So from sort of anxiety through to psychosis and beyond, they work by lying to you. They tell you you're a freak. They tell you that you're alone. And they tell you that nobody's going to understand what you're going through. And that's just not true. Like, not only does someone understand what you're going through, someone is going through what you're going through right now. You know, I really hope, Caggie, that someone right now is watching or listening to this podcast and going, oh my God, that's what I have. That's what I have. Because that's the moment. You're not cured, obviously, but it's the beginning of your road to recovery, right? And that was the case for me. And it was writing about OCD that got me better, you know, and immersed me accidentally in the mental health community. And, you know, out of desperation, I remember I'd started writing Mad Girl, which was all about OCD. And I remember someone saying to me, we can't put this stuff in about like worrying that you're a paedophile. And I was like, well, if I can't put this in, I can't write this book, because this is what, you know, this is what it's like for people. And I just really felt this sense of like, I need to break through this. I really need to break through this. And I really needed to connect with other people who were like me.
And also for your own cathartic experience, to shine a light on the things that you'd kept hidden for so long.
Yeah. And it was like a revelation to me that there really were other people out there who felt this, and so many people. And I remember when I was writing Mad Girl, obviously writing about mental illness doesn't make you feel great. And I sort of forced myself out for a run. And I remember I was running around my local common and I was listening to this podcast about this writer called Carson McCullers, she was an American writer, and she wrote this beautiful book called The Heart is a Lonely Hunter. And she died. She tried to kill herself many times, but she eventually died of alcoholism, I think, in her 50s. But on this documentary, they had found this kind of archive audio footage of her. And she said, sometimes it feels like everyone is part of a we except for me. And that is exact. And I stopped in my tracks. I was like, that is what mental illness feels like. And I sort of looked around Clapham Common and I saw like people playing football together, or women pushing buggies together, and the really strange people doing like military fitness together. And I was like, there's something for all these people. But why is there nothing for people with mental health issues? We know 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health issue each year. We know that movement and getting outside is one of the best things for it. Like, why is there nothing? So I set up this thing called Mental Health Mates, which was literally like, I just went on Twitter and was like, come and meet me for a walk in Hyde Park. And my husband was like, what if a load of nutters show up? And I'm like, that's the point. And this is how, and it was through that. And now Mental Health Mates is like all over the country. There's like 150 walks around the country. It's gone nearly 10 years on. It's beyond my wildest dreams. It's a huge peer support network. But it all started with this desperate need to sort of connect with other people like me. Yeah. And then through that, I sort of started meeting people in the mental health community, doing all sorts of stuff. I'm just realizing I'm like, the way I drink isn't normal, isn't healthy, and through that. And then, taking myself to rehab, because it became like, I remember Mad Girl came out in 2016. It did really well. And then I remember being invited in 2016 to the launch of this campaign called Heads Together, which was the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, now Prince and Princess of Wales, and Prince Harry. It was their mental health campaign that they put together, I don't know if you remember, in 2016, 2017. And because I'd been writing about it, they invited me along to the launch, and Heads Together was the official charity for the London Marathon in 2017. And I found myself offering to do the London Marathon. And it was like, there was this really strange, talk about Saturn Returns and the kind of moments where change is like this really strange moment where my career had never been like more successful. And yet personally, I was like unraveling, like I remember asking Prince Harry to come on my podcast, Mad World. And I don't know if you remember when he spoke for the first time about all of his mental health issues in regards to his mum. And that was with me, and it was like insane. And I was running the marathon and raised like £60,000 for Heads Together, and my book was #1, and it was like, and everyone was like, you're amazing, and I was like going home and just drinking, and so I looked like, oh, look at this girl, she's battled all her mental health issues. And I was like, but in a way I trust all that timing, and I trust because I knew, I was like, if you don't deal with this, you're going to lose all of this.
What, because it's the sort of the self-sabotaging
that
eventually gone.
It was like, I was like, you've got to, there's a reason this is kind of, and so, but it was only through talk, I'd always drank like that. It wasn't like,
but if you don't mind me asking, drank like what? Because I think a lot of people with addiction or alcoholism, it's like there's a whole spectrum of
drunk like that. Like I still just drink water like this, Yeah, there's a okay, so my idea of an alcoholic was old man, park bench, paper bag, drinking from from morning till night, right? And I was like, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm a mum. I do reformer Pilates. I'm running a marathon, and I don't drink all day. I don't wake up and think I really want to drink. In fact, most mornings I wake up and go, oh my God, I'm never drinking again. Like I feel the shame. Yeah. I was very much a binge drinker, but even though I wasn't drinking all day, I was thinking about drinking all day. So really my life was very much balanced around when I could have a drink. So like if I had a big work thing on a Tuesday morning, I was like, well, I can't drink on Monday night. Not that I wouldn't, do you know what I mean? So Sunday night I'm going to have to drink. And then it was like I had all these rules. I was like, oh wait, it's like I can start drinking as soon as my daughter is in bed. And my daughter was going to bed at increasingly early times. Do you know what I mean? Like
2 p.m.
Yeah, well, do you know what I mean? And then I was like, I won't drink wine because I would just black out so quickly. And it was like I had all these rules. And then cocaine, when
did that come into the mix?
Well, cocaine had been like a massive feature of my 20s and my early 30s because, I think it's a big thing that people don't talk about. Like, It goes hand in hand with drinking. And I know, like, I feel so old when I talk about drugs now because I hear young people and they're like, we've been microdosing and mushrooms. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I've got no idea what you're talking about. But, when I was young, you'd go to the pub and you'd drink loads and you'd take loads of Coke so you could carry on drinking. It's a very binge drinky drug, And when I went into rehab, I was like, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict because that sounds cooler, right? I was like, I can't be a common or garden alcoholic. And I realised quite soon, I was like, no, you are just a common or garden alcoholic and you only took drugs so you could carry on drinking.
Because I think it's quite hard for people to distinguish which, the one is. Because they kind of go so hand in hand.
Well, it doesn't matter. Like, really, I remember, like, lots of people come in and go, drugs are my problem, not alcohol. And then people say, okay, so it won't be a problem giving up alcohol then, if that's not your problem. And they go, oh, shit. That is a problem. Like,
but I think one's often the gateway to the other.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest now, it's like so my drinking was like, on the face of it, it was very jolly and I wasn't like an angry drunk and I didn't, but it was, I always took it a bit further than everyone. I was always the last person standing. And, I think it was really interesting because in my 20s, I could just tell myself that I was a party girl.
Yeah. And also everyone loves the last woman standing. Do you know what I mean?
Well,
so
yeah,
it's like it becomes a thing that you kind of feel liked because
you make people feel better about their own drinking.
Yeah.
And actually, you asked earlier, like, why do you think there's still such a stigma attached to our views of like alcoholism and addiction? And I think it's because people don't want to hear it because they like their glass of wine in the evening. And I'm always like, your glass of wine in the evening is fine. Like, I'm not anti-alcohol at all. I'm just anti us not acknowledging how harmful it is to some people.
For some people, exactly, but it's very hard. No one can really, some people can tell because there are signs, but you can have one person drinking a certain amount at a party and another person, and one person will have an issue with it, that they can't process it in the same way, or that something in their brain is like, right, I want to go to oblivion right now. The other person is like,
I only ever wanted to go to oblivion. Like, genuinely now, if you came up to me and were like, oh, have you heard they've created a new drug and like a pill, and if you take it you'll only you can drink moderately, and I'd be like, not interested in taking that pill. Like, even now,
you like the extreme.
Yeah, like the only reason I can like comprehend, like, if I was to pick up a drink today, if I was to say, Caggie, let's go to the pub,
We're back in your old haunts.
it would be oblivion. Like, it wouldn't be one or two. Like, the thought of one or two, I'm like, oh, I'd rather have none, genuinely. And
why do you think that is?
Well, I just don't. Because I'm an alcoholic.
But what's the sort of desire to go to oblivion? Is it that sort of feeling of wanting to escape?
Yeah. Absolutely. It's
this is a ticket kind of out of what I'm experiencing.
Yeah. It's an easy way to kind of blank out. God, even just talking about it, I'm like, I don't miss. It's the best thing I ever did was get sober.
Yeah. And so you were speaking about how, you were having all this external success and yet unraveling sort of behind closed doors. What was the turning point where you were like, I'm actually going to go and sort this out?
It's really interesting. I always say this, like, we like to have those sort of neat narratives where it's like there's a moment where you go, I can't do this.
It was a series of moments.
Yeah, and like in a way it was like millions of moments over a period of decades, you know, like never again, never again, never again. That all added up to one, where it just so happened that on a Saturday morning in August 2017, I'd been on a bender and I had come home at 10 in the morning, which is not what a 37-year-old mother of a 4-year-old should really be doing, you know. But it wasn't like massively worse than some other things that had happened, you know. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. If I don't stop drinking, I'm going to die. I'm either going to die because I like fall off a balcony or something pissed, do you know what I mean? Or I'm going to die because I choose to kill myself. Or kind of almost worse of all, I'm going to die because I carry on living in this kind of Groundhog Day existence. And it was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm out. I'm an alcoholic. I have a problem. Like here, like it was like, I surrender. Take me, you know, have me, warts and all. And you know, and I really believe in the kind of timing. I'd started to sort of meet people who were sober, you know, who had
just by coincidence.
Well, yeah, like I trust that.
Yeah.
I trust the universe kind of brings people to you.
Like spirit guides. People just kind of come into your path,
absolutely.
and they offer a bit of a lantern when there's otherwise darkness, and you're like, okay, maybe I should follow that.
Yeah, like there's like 2 or 3 people that were just really kind to me, and I couldn't believe that. And they were like decades sober, you know, and they take me to a 12-step meeting or something, you know. So I knew kind of a bit of the language of recovery, and I'd been to my first 12-step meeting in a lunch break in like 2015 or something. So a couple of years before I'd tried a few times, and but I wasn't ready for it. But yeah, it's really difficult, but I trust the timing, and I trust it. I remember thinking I was the worst person in the world, like the worst mum in the world, because who does this? Like, I was like, I genuinely thought that pregnancy was going to do for me what like rehab does for everyone else.
Which I've heard for some people it does.
It does. So like, I remember someone saying, oh, some people do just mature out, you know. Yeah. But I wasn't one of those people. And it was a real like shock to me when 2 weeks after my daughter was born, all I wanted to do, like as soon as I was physically well enough from an emergency C-section, all I wanted to do was drink and take drugs, really. And it was such a shock to me, because I was like, how can you want to do this? You have this beautiful little thing and you have this life you've always wanted, and yet still you can't stop yourself. Like, why are you such a fucking dickhead? Like that. And it was like, I had to bury that shame deep down and all sorts of justifications. Like, of course I'm a better mum because in the evening I have a drink, or 18, you know? And, you know, the truth is that if I wasn't middle class and I wasn't, you know, a broadsheet newspaper journalist, maybe I wouldn't have wouldn't have kept my child. You know, but I think about that every day, and it's important that I think about that. You know, I've been really lucky. I genuinely think I'm lucky to be an alcoholic. I'm lucky to have been able to go through all of these things and to still be alive, and to be here on a dark, you know, winter morning, you know, talking to you is like such a huge privilege, you know. And the least I can do is kind of talk about these things in the hope that other people will kind of, you know, might resonate with other people, and they might be able to go and get some help, because we all deserve like
that support. And
yeah,
for anyone that might be listening that's either going through something like this or has someone very close to them that is, because I know, you know, you've mentioned about how it was a series of, I guess, rock bottoms. It wasn't necessarily one moment. But it's quite hard if you have someone in your life that you're observing kind of going down that track. How much do you think other people can kind of intercept or play a role in them getting to that stage? Or do you think it really has to come from the individual?
It has to come from the individual. I think it's really important to, you know, you can try and stage interventions, and obviously, you know, if that's what you feel you need to do, then you should, you know, one should do it. But I think it's really important to know that it's addiction is so powerful. Do you know what I mean? That I don't know why some people get it. Some people can get sober and others can't. I don't know. I
think it's another reason why people find it an uncomfortable subject, perhaps because people don't entirely understand it. And I think Matthew Perry's I was watching an interview with him, and he was talking about his addiction and how it was from when he first tasted alcohol that he knew immediately it was having a different effect on him to other people. And I found that quite interesting, because then of course we talked about Gabor Mate saying that it's connected with trauma, and I'm sure there are so many layers to why certain people are impacted by it and why others aren't.
I also think it's really interesting when we talk about Matthew Perry, and I think and people that die, you know, I don't know, I don't think any of us know how Matthew Perry died, but you know, I think there's this sort of, certainly I've noticed in that narrative of, oh, had he relapsed, you know, and my feeling in that is like, so what if he, you know, like, obviously does it make it less of a tragedy that this man is dead, you know, like I think that's
the subtle underlying
narrative. And I think we've really got to get past this, actually, with so many different mental illnesses, that sometimes death is unfortunately the end point of some mental illnesses, in the same way that it is some physical illnesses. You know, because I think and that's a really, I feel like quite weird saying that, you know, because
people always think that it's a choice.
Yeah, and I think there's this kind of like, obviously it would be wonderful for us to live in a world where nobody died from addiction, or no one took their lives by suicide, or, you know, but I think it's, I don't know, I think it's really important that loved ones of people know that you can't, you know, we're only in control of ourselves, and even and arguably not very much in control of ourselves. You know, we're all running off like little systems that were ingrained in us before we turned like 4. Do you know what I mean? Or 7 months. I don't know what there's, you know, and I think that. I don't know, I don't know. It's a difficult one, but I think that if there are people listening who have lost loved ones to suicide, or feel that they are losing loved ones to addiction, you know, there's that pain, and then there's the pain on top of it of like, why can't I stop this person why can't I help this person feel better? You know, and I think in that respect, it's really important to be able to say that, like, you, like, often with addiction, like, it doesn't mean that the addict loves you any less. You know, does that make sense? It doesn't mean the perfect, you know, like, because someone has taken their life, it doesn't mean that they love you less, or that you were less. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. That there was something wrong in your relationship, or, you know, like, if you were a bit more this, or you were a bit more that, you might have been able to save them. Yeah. Like, I think that's
what people think.
They're
like, if and that's them more, or if
or if I could have, you know, and children of alcoholics think, if I was, you know, maybe if I was a little bit more easy, and I was less me, and I was less demanding, then maybe dad would have been there more. And it's like, no, babes, that's nothing to do with you. It's, you know, like, dad loved you as much as dad was able to love anyone. Do you know what I mean? But dad was an alcoholic, and that's an, you know, it's an illness that robs people of, you know, of of, in some cases, like common human decency.
Yeah. What do you think some of the steps we can take sort of collectively as a society to alleviate some of these feelings or to bring about more awareness to these subjects?
I think we live currently in a very, I've got way more heavy than I like sort of perhaps meant to, but we're very judgmental now. And I think that is, I sort of feel like we're living in a time, like sort of incredible judgment, social media and mainstream media as well. It's very vicious. Yeah, really vicious. And it all sort of feeds each other. And I really do think that less judgment is the way. When I'm judging someone, I'm like, oh dear, I've got to go and do some work on myself today. When I find myself going, that person is such, I'm like, ooh, Bryony, you need to go to an AA meeting, or you need to
you have the awareness to know that it's more about you than it is the other person. But I think most people seem to not have that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think for me, like, all I can do is talk about my experiences, and in the hope that encourages other people to talk about their experiences, and and so on and so forth. It's like you said, it's bringing it into the light, because from your own experience doing it on such a huge scale how healing that was and how helpful that was to so many people. That then if that has a knock-on effect and they can then do the same, it's a sort of like trickles down. Shame dies when you expose it to the light. Mm-hmm. That's the truth. And I don't have any like hard or fast answers. Obviously I wish the government put more, put more resources into mental health care and all the rest of it. But, increasingly I'm also of the belief that actually just the way that we live our lives, modern life is rubbish. It's a bit rubbish. Like, we are not, the way we live our lives isn't conducive to mental well-being. Like, of course there's a shitload of addiction and alcoholism and mental illness out there, because we live in this sort of society that that really what it values most is kind of money and status and all of those things. And so yeah, of course there's lots of unhappy people out there. I think this is really interesting, and I've tried to explore this in Mad Woman. It is basically that actually the thing I've come to realize in all the years I've been writing about mental illness and doing the work on myself as well, is that actually, spoiler alert, I'm not mad. I'm perfectly fucking sane. And the way that I have responded to things in my life was really appropriate. OCD, depression, anxiety, all of these things, they feel horrible. They are horrible, but they are often very appropriate responses to situations. So I have come to realize, I always remember going on this retreat about 5 or 6 years ago, and this amazing woman called Donna Lancaster, who is Donna, she's been on the podcast. She's heaven. And I remember her saying to me, you can so I always, is this the bridge? Yes. Yeah. And I always called my OCD Jareth the Goblin King. I don't know if you ever saw Labyrinth. Like, maybe you were a bit too young. Years ago, but yeah. Yeah. And I always thought, and Jareth the Goblin King was like David Bowie and the Silver, and evil, but ever so slightly enticing. And that to me really summed up OCD. So I kind of gave it this name. And I remember Donna saying to me, you can thank Jareth and let him go now. He's not helping you anymore. And I thought, helping me? What do you mean helping me? Like, how has OCD helped me? And I realized that it was like an incredibly clever a mechanism of my brain trying to protect me, to try to keep me safe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was like a skewed coping mechanism. And that's what all of these things are. And, I think it's much more like, I want to live in a world where, I sort of, I've experienced this in terms of, I've been through a really early menopause, and I've been just really shocked by how little we know about the link between hormones and and mental health. And the only reason I found out that I was going through an early menopause was because I had a complete breakdown, and it was so weird because it felt like it had come out of nowhere, because I was like, I'm sober. And the OCD came back so badly. It was like hideous, terrifying,
and you couldn't figure
early
out why,
2022, and I couldn't figure out why. And it was and I sort of was hearing lots of women talk about perimenopause and all of that, and I was thinking,
it's still, I mean, it's coming on, but it was all very hush hush.
Yeah, and like, let me tell you something, Caggie. If men went through menopause, we would talk about nothing else. They would be like, "Why is your podcast not all about menopause?" Podcast, blah, 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 blah. Like, oh, could you stop talking about menopause? We get it. I'm like, you think this is talking about a lot? If you went through it now. So anyway, but what I have realised is that, my hormones, and anyway, cut a long story short, I thought I was too young. I was like, but I'm only 41. And the doctors were like, no, you're not too young. And then it turned out my mum had gone through menopause at 40. She just hadn't told me. She just hadn't thought to give me this information. And also my grandmother had gone through it at 43. And my cousin had gone, so it was like, what? And and it was, we sort of pieced these things together, and then realizing that the first time I got a very bad flare up of OCD was just before my first period. And I don't think by all means that hormones are the reason I've experienced mental illness.
No, but the fact that they were never looked at or even considered.
Yeah, but they certainly make it a lot harder to deal with the mental illness that I think I was probably always, predisposed to. Anyway, but I realized, I thought to myself when I was writing this book, and I was thinking about menopause and this process and how just the health gap, the gender, never mind the gender pay gap, the gender health gap is just so huge. And the way I was like treated as I was trying to work out what the hell was wrong with me
by the doctors.
Yeah, I was having these mad palpitations, and I was fainting, and it was really odd, and I was sort of being treated like I was
mad.
I was mad, yeah, and it was all in my mind, and it all sort of
pair that with the fact that you had OCD. You're like, they're not going to believe me.
This is like, yeah, and this all culminates in actually earlier this year. I ended up I was like, I thought the palpitations were stress related or menopause related, and then I fainted. My husband was like, "You fainted one too many times. You're going to the doctor." And I got an ECG, and while I was having the ECG, these palpitations kind of struck up, which I was very lucky that happened, because they kind of came every 2 weeks or whatever. And the person doing it was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I'm fine." And they were like, "No, you're not. You're in atrial fibrillation. We need to get you to hospital." And it turned out that all along I've had this like arrhythmia, this heart condition, that's just always been dismissed. It's like, oh, she's just being a hysterical woman, or it's menopause, or it's, but like, so, and I was like, so you're telling me they're like, yeah, this is a proper heart condition. But I also believe, I really do believe it was like my body's way of going, are you going to look after yourself? Are you going to, are you going to listen to yourself? Anyway, I've gone completely off tangent there. But like, of course, women, of course we, I'm not meaning to sound victim-y or anything like that. But
you don't have to sort of caveat it with that. I think it's important that these conversations are had, because, like you said, it stops the next person feeling lonely or confused, or perhaps they might go and check something out that otherwise they would have just dismissed.
Yeah, I think it's, I really think life for me as a woman has been about learning not to dismiss myself. Mm-hmm. That's what it's been. And actually for me, menopause, and I sort of talk about this as well in the book, about how there's a magic to menopause and all the shit stuff that comes up for you. Like, 'cause some people sail through it, great. But the people, the stuff that came up for me was very much, I found my brain going, are you going to deal with this now, Bryony? Because if you don't deal with this now, you're never going to be free. if you don't stop dismissing yourself now, this is what your life's going to be for the rest of your life. Like, do you want to live a happy, healthy, content next 40 years in your power as you deserve to? Like, well, then you're going to have to confront this stuff. And so I'm going to bring it all up for you. Do you know what I mean?
Which probably is quite common for a lot of people going through it.
Yeah. And I do think there's a witchy magic to it. And I do believe that is what...
Talk about the witchy magics. That's very on brand for this podcast.
Well, I know. Well, I've always been very cynical. Like, when people talk about woo-woo things, I'm like, stop. Stop. And now I'm like all about the woo. Like, I'm like, the way of the woo is the way forward, you know? And I think, you know, possibly that's because as a woman, it's like, oh, the way society is set up is it's all been designed by men, right? And for me, there's an immense comfort in sort of going to that sort of more spiritual side. It feels more kind of
more feminine, I guess.
Yeah. It's more set up for the way that I would like to live my life, you know? Not herring around at 80 miles an hour.
Well, even the 9-to-5 work, you know, week is structured towards a man's hormonal cycle. Yeah.
It doesn't work. It does not work. And I think so the menopause for me has been a time to really explore that. Like, well, what does work for me though? Do you know what I mean? Instead of dismissing myself and going,
which society often, you know, does for women.
Yeah, and going, but yeah, but hang on, you're a grown woman now, Bryony. You're 43. You can live your life however you damn well want. And that's like, what? No, what? I can do what? You do whatever you want, Bryony. I'm like, what? You know, and that.
And what are some of the things that you have done?
Just say no. Like, that doesn't sound that mind blowing, but just saying no.
I think a lot of people struggle with saying no.
Just putting down boundaries and going, no, I don't want to do that. No, that doesn't work for me. And people go, what? I'm like, bye. You know, that boundaries have been a massive thing. Like, not abandoning my needs to try and meet someone else's. That to me has been like the really key piece of the last few years of my life.
And that's come about through menopause, really?
I think so, because it got so dark. It got so dark in the last couple of years that I've sort of been forced to kind of face that and face...
As in putting other people first?
Yeah, but also face the fact that what other people want from me or want, you know, is not necessarily what I want, you know, and that's okay. And if that means that I'm not as popular or I'm not as quote unquote successful professionally,
that's okay.
That's how it's going to have to be. My work is to untangle that from my worth, you know, just because I'm not, you know, winning all the awards or, do you know what I mean? Or like selling all the books or whatever. That doesn't mean I'm a less worthy human being than I was back in 2016 when, does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think we equate worth with success and accolades and things like that. So it is such an important piece to untangle that.
Yeah. And I think that's what untangling is exactly the kind of the phrase, I think, the word to use, because it is kind of going, well, who am I? You know, how am I here at the age of 43 and a half, only just really working out who I am and what are the things that matter to me, you know? I really, I don't, you know, I like learning to trust myself has been the sort of the work. Huge. Yeah.
And trusting your intuition.
Yeah. And it's still really hard. I find it really hard. You know, I find it really hard not to people please and not to kind of, not to obsessively feel the need to be good.
And also, because I wanted to ask you about this a bit earlier when we were talking about the OCD and this really big morality piece that seems to come with it. And I've spoken to other people. One of my dearest friends suffers from it very badly. And it's this, I mean, we all have an idea of right and wrong and we want to be good people. But for people that struggle with OCD, it seems to be this huge, humongous thing that becomes such a burden. Why do you think that is?
It is a way, I think when you have OCD, you create all of these kind of very extreme rules so that you don't veer from your line of good.
But where does that stem from?
I think it's about, feeling, for whatever reason, in your formative years, feeling like you're bad or you're in the way or you're responsible for other people's feelings. I don't know. Like I can't specific, I'm generalizing, but for me, it was like, I've always had this kind of core belief that I'm just by existing, I'm bad and I'm getting in people's ways and I'm responsible for everyone being in a bad mood and all of that. And so OCD, I think, was a very good way, to check that I'm being good, to check that I'm not in any way ruining anyone else by existing. And what I've had to do is learn that it's actually okay if I am bad sometimes. And it is okay if people are cross with me. And it is really okay if I fuck up and I make mistakes.
Doesn't make you any less.
That's been the powerful thing. I live in terror. Do you get this? I live in terror of people being cross with me. Am I in trouble? What the fuck? You're 43. Who gives a shit? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's like I'm back at school, and
you feel like you are at school. You feel like a child.
And then what everyone wants to do is say, "Oh no, of course people aren't cross with you." But actually, what I need to learn is that maybe people are,
and that's okay.
And that is okay. The world keeps on spinning. You are like, I will underplay the positive effect I have on people and really overplay the negative effect.
Can you give me an example of that?
Like if someone says to me, "Oh, your book really helped," I'm like, dismiss that. But if someone says to me, I'm trying to think of an example. So
you'll hyper-focus on the negative, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can do that as well.
Yeah. Someone says to me, "Oh, this thing in your book, like the fact that there was a full stop missing from that sentence." I'm like, "Oh my God."
Well, I think it goes back to, the coping mechanism. And I was thinking about this actually this morning, how we use putting ourselves down to drive us forward. But actually, we could pick ourselves up and be like, yeah, do you know what I mean? It would be more motivating.
It would also be much easier. It would make life so much easier. And I think we all live under this mistaken belief that we have to be really hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
And that is the only way we're going to improve and get better. And it's like, if we just say, actually, you're really cool, you don't need to get better, we're like, oh my God, we're all just going to collapse and die and never get anything done.
But I've never thought about that before this morning. I was like, what if I actually felt like, I'm doing things right, like things are going well? Would I just dissolve into a puddle?
I actually just, I do always think that like my like I always felt like I had to feel bad, like it was almost like a preemptive thing. Like if I feel bad now, then I'm there before anyone else has made me feel bad, and I don't know, some way I'm going to control the feeling of badness, but also I can say, no, it's okay, you don't have to be cross with me, I already feel terrible. Yeah. Now I'm very much into that thing of like, always reach for the good feeling, the thing that makes you feel better, the thing that is going to make you feel happier. That's not necessarily like the drug, and that isn't like a drug or a drink or a binge. That isn't going to make me feel better in the long run. It's like, sorry,
it's going for the run or
reach for the good, the thing that is going to make you feel good, because like I'm sorry, I'm just gonna the water is going to make me feel good. Because the way I see it is like, everything I do has to nourish my soul, and I don't care if I sound like a wanker for saying that, right? I want to nourish my soul, and I want to kind of just put my ego in place, and by ego, you know what I mean by that. I don't mean like I'm the big I am, like that bit that wants to, the kind of, it's almost like the inner child in me that wants to go, but nobody loves you, Bryony. You need to prove yourself. I go, shh, just shh. And I want to nourish my soul. What is gonna make me feel better, and what is gonna make that little child feel better, I guess. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I'm not articulating myself at all well.
No, but I do know, and it's also reaching for the thing. It's that sort of pain pleasure. It's like sometimes you might not want to go for the run because it feels like, oh God, why would I want to go for it? But you know you're going to feel better and you're
always.
going to do something for yourself that sort of fills you up rather than reaching for something that momentarily alleviates a discomfort but actually causes you more long-term
I do
pain.
think exercise is like hands down the best way.
But I think people always think that it's too simple. I, myself included, when I'm like in a bad headspace, I'm like, I actually haven't done any exercise.
Surely this
week.
can't work.
And then I'm like, that can't be the reason. This is way more complicated. And then, you know, you go for a run or you do whatever class and you immediately feel better.
Yeah, totally. This morning I woke up and I was like, just fuck this. Like, but I realized, you know, like my default setting is, it's like, oh my God, everything is terrible and the world is about to end. That is my default setting, right? And I wake up and it's like, oh my God, like I wake up in terror. Like, no word of a lie, I wake up in terror every morning. Like, oh my God, there's like an elephant standing on my chest. There's like, I'm like, so everything's going to go wrong. Everyone hates me. That is how I wake up. And I've just had to accept that. So what I need to do every morning is just as quickly as possible, like almost like flip that, reset it and like prove it wrong.
What are the reset tools?
I just get up and I go to CrossFit. Which is like mad, and I go and I just throw myself around with a load of people that are way fitter than me, but I don't care, and I have fun, and I go for a run or something like that, or I sort of say the serenity prayer.
That's powerful.
Yeah, and just like help me. I think just look up at the sky and go, let me be of use today. Mm-hmm. You know, just remove all those things that want to hold me back. I do also think now the terror I wake up in is like this sort of, it's the residuals of a kind of a contract I must have made invisibly with I don't know who, do you know what I mean, when I was a kid, of like, you have to make yourself a bit smaller, you have to be in a bit of like, you have to be in a bit of misery the whole time. Do you know what I mean? You have to be stressed because otherwise, you know, like working. What like if you were just content and happy and going with the flow, like the world would end. I don't know what you think is going to happen. And now I'm a bit more like, no, just go out and dazzle. Just go out. Like I used to think that I was too loud. And I still think that sometimes I'm too, you know, people think about like, oh, I'm not enough. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm too much. You know, and I need to just be a bit smaller and a bit less like that. And I sometimes wonder if that feeling of terror is like my way of stopping myself from dazzling, going and being me on full tilt, on full power, on full, you know, on full wattage or whatever. And now I'm like, no, Bryony, it is you just got to go and be on full brightness.
100%.
Just got to go and do that, like, and all that other stuff stopping you is, you know, you're not a wallflower, Bryony, so just accept it.
And also, I think that's such a beautiful way of putting it. It's the residuals of this sort of unconscious or subconscious contract that you made with someone or some part.
Well, I didn't make it with anyone. I mean, I made it with like
I think a lot of people will resonate with that because when they when they've done a lot of healing work and they've changed their entire lifestyle and they've done it for quite a long time and they still have these things come up, it can make them feel bad about themselves again. But actually knowing that, having more compassion for yourself, because like you say, it's just the residue of that, and over time it will just kind of dissipate a little bit more and more.
Rome was not built in a day.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot. I mean, God, but I'm so excited, like, because if I think about like, all of the stuff I've uncovered in the last, since I got sober, since I got sober, so like 7 years, I'm like, oh my God, if I'm lucky enough to like stay alive every day for the next 7 years, I'm like, what joyous things am I going to learn about myself next? Yeah. Don't you ever think that?
Yeah. And that as you get older, it's such a blessing because you uncover so much more about yourself.
And will I be looking back in a few years' time going, oh my God, do you remember when I did that podcast with Caggie and I was just absolutely fucking mad? Do you know what I mean? Like, and I didn't realize then that I was, you know, like, it's like kind of wonderful life, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. And the final thing I wanted to ask you about, because I feel that it's quite a big theme for what we've discussed, but also because I heard you speak about it on someone else's show, about this sort of concept of belonging and feeling part of community. And I feel that that's something that has been slightly lacking in today's world for many people. Whilst we're super connected, I think people often feel, like you say, other. You know, like
well,
I
think, you know, we feel really connected, but actually we've never been more disconnected. Because we're not like meeting up and, you know,
actually connecting,
like
with each
they're
other,
looking in the whites of each other's eyes and feeling each other's heartbeats. And that sounds a bit weird. Like, I don't go like, let me feel your heartbeat.
You've gone full woo.
But do you know what I mean? Like, connection is the opposite of addiction.
And how does that look for you on a sort of day to day?
So I instinctively want to isolate and disconnect, you know, and that's when Jareth is in charge. And it was really interesting, actually, because, and I think, you know, this is really important. I think the pandemic, we kind of is like, oh, it's done, it's over, but the effect of living like that in a sort of defensive crouch for 2 years, but also isolated and in judgment, and a lot of judgment about other people as well. And that's another way of disconnecting, you know,
Judging people,
you know. And I think that's going to take years for us all to get over. And so for me, I don't instinctively find it easy to connect. I find it really hard, which is why I have to force myself to do it.
Because you'll talk yourself out of it.
Yeah, I guess, I know this may sound really kind of ridiculous, but I'm quite an anxious person.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to go to I don't know about you, but
I get socially anxious, which again, I don't think anyone would think that of either of us.
No,
as
but
personalities.
I see people at like parties, you know, like people on Instagram where they're like hair and makeup by, dress by, you know, like glam squad. And they're like, oh, here we all are having an amazing time. And I'm like, that's literally my worst nightmare. I'm like, why don't you just want to be at home having some chili con carne and watching I'm a Celebrity?
Yeah, but what I do is I see that, I'm like, God, I really need to get out more and do more of that kind of stuff. And then I'll be invited to something, I'm like, I don't want to go.
No, I don't want to go out after 6 p.m. I don't really want to go out after 4 p.m. at this time of year, you know, in the winter. Like, so, but
you
that's
have to
but
then
like
create, you know, other moments.
So I have to be like, I have to really stay connected. And
it's the same as like the working out thing, right? It's like when I'm sort of spiraling and then I think, actually, I haven't seen anyone in a week.
Yeah. Oh, I haven't actually been out. Oh, you know, like just going outside and going to like the corner shop and like chat, or going to Sainsbury's and just chatting to the cashier, and they'll be like, "Are you okay? Why are you talking to me?" For me, so I love CrossFit. That's like a real community, and 12-step meetings as well. That's really important for me. And
then the communities you've created online as well.
Well, yeah, so all of that sort of checking in. I have to be quite careful with social media because I can use it in a slightly kind of addictive way. Yeah. And I get like, I don't like it, you know, you can see how many people have like unfollowed you in a day, and I'm like, oh my God, it's because I'm a terrible human. And you know, my brain will just go, Jareth will jump on it and go, come on, look how many people, look, 57 people hate you. It's like the bots, like who cares? Like, and so I have to be quite careful. It's all a bit of a tightrope, but I think we're all kind of learning at the same time, you know.
100%. Yeah, I don't think it's easy for anyone to navigate that space because it's still relatively new.
Yeah, and like for a lot of my career has not been on when I wrote Mad Girl, I had about 2 followers, and then it just sort of went crazy, and now there was a period where I was getting like 1,000 followers a day, and now I'm lucky if I get 1 follower a day. Do you know what I mean? Like, and then you're sort of like,
it's hard not to equate it with a sense of self-worth.
Yes. algorithm. Like I'm like, oh, I'm like totally like my boss is the algorithm. I'm like, this has got to stop. Like I've made the algorithm happy. Again, I'm like, this is just another form of people pleasing, Bryony. The algorithm doesn't actually exist. It's not a person. I'm like, but like, at one point the algorithm was really happy. The algorithm was like, here, all these followers, you're amazing. And I'm like, I need to be like that person again, but that person's gone, Fuck the algorithm. I just can't. I hope that we're going to a place, I don't know about you, but like where there is more, I can see people consciously choosing to kind of block out their social media a bit more and do things that are a bit, that are a bit more sort of mindful or, I don't know, like I'm not ever going to go on TikTok.
No, I've not done it yet. I don't think I can.
No, but I saw there was a great interview with Adele when her last album came out, and she was talking about how the record companies were saying to her, you've got to get on TikTok. You've got to get on TikTok, and you've got to like appeal to the TikTok generation. And she was like, "What?
That's not my generation."
She's like, "Why? What about the people that aren't on TikTok who are like my people, like women in their 30s and their 40s who, don't want to be on TikTok? I don't want to be on TikTok. I haven't got enough time."
Well, it's about staying true to yourself, isn't it? And finding the things that work for you.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's so important, and like pushing back.
Yeah. And as a final thing, I mean, it's always quite a broad thing to say, but is there anything that you'd like to share as like a sort of final note to our listeners before we sign off?
Okay, the thing I always like to share, because it's really important, is it's like a little biology lesson. You may have heard it, we do it before, but like you are like, just to let you all know that we are all miracles. The chances of any of us existing are like 1 in 10 trillion billion zillion. Like there's more chance of like dinosaurs roaming the earth again. So like when your biological parents like had it off, if your dad had said something to annoy your mum, or someone had knocked on the door or whatever, and they'd ended up having sex 5 seconds later, you could be like a completely different person.
That's so weird.
So like millions of sperm are released into the woman's body, and the woman's body is like, I don't want any old sperm, so it releases acid, and the acid kills the weak sperm, like die. So all those versions of you gone, yeah. And then the sperm has to like go on like an uphill Ironman sperm wise, yeah, and get through like membranes that are like your eye punching through those walls. Okay, lots of them get tired, so all of those versions of you gone. And then they get to the fallopian tubes, right? And they're like, am I going to go left? Am I going to go right? Is there even an egg in either of them? Because there's only an egg there for like 1 calendar day of each month, right? Half of them go, I'm going to go right. All those versions of you gone, right? So the ones that get, and they're like, oh my God, there is an egg there. And they go towards the egg. And then the egg is surrounded by white blood cells, which act like nightclub bouncers, like you're not coming in. So the one that fertilizes the egg and gets through is like, fuck me. And then, well, yeah. And then like, not only like, then that egg has to, as we know, not all fertilized eggs go the distance, so you have to, and then the day we are born is the most dangerous day of our lives, often doctors say. And then every day after that, you've stayed alive to this point, listening to this podcast, me wanging on about God knows what. Like, you are a fucking miracle. Like, the universe wants you here exactly as you, doesn't want you as Kim Kardashian or, I don't know, like Beyonce or Taylor Swift. The universe wants you as you, right? So just go and dazzle and be unapologetically you, because you're a miracle.
I love that. I was not expecting that, but that was fantastic.
It's a pep talk I give myself each day. Like, wake up in the morning, my daughter's like, oh, not this again, Mom. But it's true. I think we take for granted the fact we're here, and
we shouldn't.
The chances are slim.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Bryony, for joining me on the Saturn Returns podcast. I've loved this conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode with me and Bryony. I hope that you enjoyed it. And as I touched on at the beginning, you know, this idea of belonging, we spoke about Gabor Mate, and he talks a lot about authenticity versus belonging. And actually, her journey with alcoholism and OCD, I feel that there is this really strong need in all of us to feel like we belong. And I love that she's created that in such a powerful way with the meetups that she does, you know, helping people that are struggling on their own journey. And I guess that's what we're really trying to create here at Saturn Returns. It's about having those really raw and honest conversations and realizing that, you know, the thoughts and feelings you have about yourself that are circulating in your mind, that you feel you're the only one that's experiencing, and therefore you have this internalized shame. The reality is there are so many other people that are thinking and feeling the exact same way, and that alleviates so much of the pressure, so much of the isolation, and you realize that we're all sort of flawed, similar beings trying to navigate this strange thing called life. And if you can go through it with an open mind and an open heart and humor, it's just a wonderful thing. So thank you again, Bryony, for being so vulnerable and talking so eloquently about these subjects that are tough for us to talk about sometimes. And for those that have been affected by it and it's helped in some way, I would love it if you could share it with someone you think might find it useful, or just share it online on social media, because that really helps us get discovered by new people. And thank you so much for listening. And as always, remember, you are not alone. Sending lots of love.